Howdy gaming people, Toby from Pixel Pop Network here with another episode of the Video Game Popcast. I am joined by my lovely co-host Matthew.
Hi.
And for this episode we have a very special guest. Famous or infamous? Which would you prefer? I think famous. We have Zack Jick, I believe is the in-game name, Johnson, from Asymmetric Games. Most well known for Kingdom of Loathing and West of Loathing, but there are, of course, a few other titles in there as well. Welcome to the show, Zack.
Thanks for having me.
So you come all the way from California, USA?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. So I guess, the best place to start any story is at the start. So tell me, Zack, you're a young man in, say, high school or college, and how do you go from Zack, finish your math homework, piss off, I won't do what you tell me, to creating a game?
Well, Kingdom of Loathing didn't release until I was 26, so there was a little bit of time there. When I was a kid, it was you could still go to a bookstore and buy a book that was nothing but the listings of source code for games in BASIC for you to type in yourself.
Right.
Program that way. So I did a lot of that, as a 10 to 13-year-old, say, and it always sort of struck me as sad that I lived in a time in history where one person couldn't really make a game anymore, because there'd been a time before that where you had your Richard Garriott and those guys, but everything had gotten so big at that point that it no longer felt like making a game as a one-person project was really feasible. And so it kind of wasn't until later when the web became a thing. So basically, I went to college for a minute. It didn't work out super well the first time around. I wasn't really ready for it. But I just sort of went. I moved back we were in Arizona at that point, and I moved back to Arizona and just got a sort of a series of IT and web programming jobs. And then decided after I moved to Phoenix that I was going to get out of computers for good. So I
that appears to have worked.
Enrolled in school again to get a psychology degree. And while I was there, I remembered, oh wait, computer jobs pay 4 times as much as other jobs for a quarter of the work. And so I got a job at the computer science department at Arizona State while I was there. That was more or less where I started working on the stuff that would eventually turn into Kingdom of Loathing.
Okay.
And so, it basically, history came around to provide an opportunity for the skill set that I had to make a game. And so I did.
Okay. So what kind of preempted you to make this? Because it sounds like you weren't thinking about making a game from the start. This just come out of nowhere, or? Well,
so I had started to notice that there were some other web games that were multiplayer games that really reminded me of the games that I had played on BBSs when I was in high school. Which were kind of asynchronous, turn-based, typically. Just a lot of resource management, kind of civilization versus civilization stuff. And there was a lot of that on the web. There were 2 games in particular that I had played. One was called Utopia, and one was called Earth:2025, which were just very much like BBS games. And what sort of bugged me about them was that they were entirely player versus player focused, and there wasn't the equivalent of Legend of the Red Dragon, which was a favorite of mine in the BBS days, which was just sort of, it had player versus player stuff, but it was mostly just go kill monsters in the forest and level up. And I said, well, why isn't there one of these? And then I kind of realized, well, wait a minute, I know how to make a website that connects to a database, and I know how to basically do all of the stuff that would be necessary for me to just make one. And if the content was real stupid and I could make it up really fast, then I could make one of these with a lot of content. So I gave that a shot. I worked on it for about a week, and then I was like, I am going to lose interest in this if I don't get some feedback or some enthusiasm from some other people. So I put it out there, and it kind of took off right away. I think the speed with which it was adopted kind of demonstrated that I was really in the right place at the right time with it. And there wasn't really none of the other games of that sort that were out there at the time were funny, I think, which was also a big part of its appeal. And yeah, I mean, I think the fact that it was constantly being worked on, the fact that I was very available, I made myself very available in the chat to people who were playing at the time, and the fact that you could play it at work because it was just a web page. Yep. Is what kind of
it's interesting that you mentioned that, though, like being available to the public. And just from my experiences in sort of as an outsider looking in over the last few years, it seems to me with especially with sort of smaller teams and indie teams, those that are heavily engaged with their player base seem to do infinitely better, you know, irrespective of the game itself. Just in terms of feedback and in terms of what other people will say about that game, is just significantly higher when you're engaged more with that community. Do you sort of see that yourself?
I do. We were lucky, I think, because I think that can be a double-edged sword in a lot of cases, because we didn't have the kind of game necessarily, or maybe we just didn't have the kind of community that would sort of, you know, threaten to come to our houses and kill us if we...
God bless America.
Which... You know, I can't even imagine what it would be like if the PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds guy, like what PlayerUnknown, I guess, is that guy. Like, what happens to him if he just like starts talking to people? You have to imagine it would be almost entirely just garbage internet stuff. And I think also, yeah, it was 15 years ago, you know, so it was a very, you had a lot of people who were like, oh, I've been on the internet since college when the internet was just IRC and we were more or less polite to each other all the time. So
yeah. I remember those days.
You keep mentioning we, so it sounded like you started off this by yourself, but you've accrued people, a team or something, or?
Yeah, so there was one buddy of mine from junior high actually who did a little bit of work very early on, but then he kind of wandered off within the first few weeks. A few months in, I started my friend Josh from high school, who was Mr. Skullhead in KOL, started doing some of the writing. We started using a little bit of the money to buy beer and stuff, and then once we basically accidentally monetized it, like the hosting bills started getting to like, this is more money than I want to spend. It was like $70 for this month. That's excessive. So I just put a thing on the front page of the game that said, hey, would you mind tossing me some money to pay for hosting? And we just got like 6 months worth of hosting costs right off the bat. It was just this
that was
tremendous
Mr.
outpouring.
Accessory, was it not?
Well, this was sort of before that.
Before that.
Yeah, so this was just like, if you know, hey, maybe give us some money to pay the bills. And then some player said, hey, what if you gave us an item in exchange for some money? Like, oh, yeah, okay, that sounds good. I'll do that. And then there's all this more money coming in than we needed. And then, the reason that the item that you get for giving money in Kingdom of Loathing is a Mr. Accessory is a little goofy. It was an item that I had made just to test the accessory equipment slot that I had just added because it worked differently than all of the others. Yeah. And it was just a testing item that I had made that I was the only one that had. But every once in a while somebody would find a bug that would allow you to create any item in the game. And so the ones that people got really excited about were the ones that they weren't supposed to have, the ones that you couldn't get in the game normally through figuring out some exploit. And so that just happened to be like a weirdly sought after item. And they said, well, why don't you give us one of those for $10? And like, okay, that sounds totally reasonable. I mean, but that has resulted in this weird, like 15-year legacy of our currency being a little smiley face button called Mr. Accessory. or a gem or whatever. We're doing that on purpose.
Right. That's awesome. But I mean, that's a legacy I guess you wear proudly, isn't it? Really? I mean, it worked out great. You know, we then, like, basically it was me and Josh, and then enough money was coming in that I was able to quit my day job, and then we sort of opened this store because people at that point said, hey, you know, once you can only wear 3 of these, so once we've gotten 3 Mr. Accessories, there's no reason for us to give you any more money. What if you gave us something that we could trade Mr. Accessories for? So we opened this store where every month we put out a new item that you could trade 1 Mr. Accessory for, and there was just an
instant, like 10-fold increase in income.
Right.
So
Right.
got really excited about that. And then that was basically when I hired the rest of the team up around it.
And have a guess what the name of the store is, Matthew.
Oh, okay. Not the Mr. Accessory store, is it?
Mr.
Okay.
Store. It's
Pretty
Mr.
Mr.
Store
Store.
where you spend your
Right,
Mr.
okay.
Accessory.
I should have guessed, really.
Oh man, I mean,
There's been some turnover in between then and now, but a lot of the people who came on around that period of time are still with us on the team that worked on West of Loathing.
yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just because once you hit a certain level of fame, naturally you're all over Wikipedia. So it's very easy for me to go to Zack Johnson, and it says here quote end quote. So it must be true because it's on the internet. Zack is this is on your website actually is obsessed with procedural generation in general, and Bob Goldthwait in particular. Is that early Bob with the voice, or late Bob where he's sort of doing stand up?
I think I kind of like both. I grew up with early voiced Bob Goldthwait, and then sort of cut my teeth on Shakes the Clown era.
I do like Bob.
Yeah, we have this kind of running gag where whenever we make any sort of a generator that is capable of making a name, it has to be capable of generating the name Bob Goldthwait. That's why Goldthwait is in the list of last names when you create a West of Loathing character. Just kind of
Right.
Nice. Okay, so Matthew and I have played some West of Loathing. Matthew played Kingdom of Loathing sort of 10 years ago. But on the team at Pixel Pop, we've got a few people that have played West of Loathing almost sort of to a religious level, as you could expect, some of your fans are. And they did throw me a few questions, which is great, because they've played the game a lot more than I. So if you'll indulge me, one of them was, it's in reference to Goblintongue, so obviously this is something that you've created. And the question was, it's now sort of popping up in other places. It's becoming almost a pop culture thing. I think the reference was the Country Ball comic series. How does it make you feel as a creator to start seeing your, creations spreading sort of further and further abroad?
It's cool. I'm not familiar with the thing that you said, but
right.
But yeah, Riff Connor, who's the main writer on West of Loathing, and really on Kingdom of Loathing at this point. He does the bulk of the writing for all of it. I sort of set the tone for what Gary talks like. I just wrote that initial conversation, and then he just really made it sing. And it's one of those things where it's like it kind of feels like something that we discovered rather than something that we created. So it's fun to see it. It's fun to see it bouncing around out there. I think like the Markiplier videos were such a big vector for that stuff in particular, kind of getting in front of literal millions of people somehow. That was such a weird. The way that happened was very unlikely. We were showing the game at PAX East, and Markiplier's girlfriend came by the booth and took a shine to it and like dragged him over and said, "You have to play this. You have to make videos about this." And he was kind of like, "Okay, whatever, it's fine." And then we didn't imagine that anything would ever come of it. But like, all right, we traded contact info, whatever. We sent him a key. He didn't redeem it. We were like, yeah, okay, that was never going to happen. And then suddenly like, oh, hey, you guys got 2 million views of your video today. Okay, nice. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, when I fired up West of Loathing for the first time, and I start in the room, and I go through the bookcase, and I find the book of walks, and I use the book, and then I start moving around the screen. That was at the point where I'm like, yes, this is a game I will now continue to play. That absolutely sold me, because that sense of humor just appealed to me. What sort of, sort of influences, or where did you pull some of your what would you pay respects to? What would you say influenced your humor when you put it into the game?
So, from kind of way before Kingdom of Loathing, even, I think that both Riff and I have a lot of things, and Josh, Mr. Skullhead, also. We were all big Douglas Adams fans. We were all big Monty Python fans in the, it was sort of late game for that. We all really enjoyed a website called the Brunching Shuttlecocks, which was, I think, primarily the work of a guy named Lore Schoberg, he still writes. He had a column for Wired for a while. I don't know what he's mainly doing with his time now, but he was just this incredibly prolific internet comedy writer that was, I don't know, I think for me at least, it just sort of reading his stuff and seeing that it was popular, off the cuff, sarcastic, funny stuff that's not mean, because a lot of early internet humor stuff was really like transgressive and gross and violent and mean. But then things like Homestar Runner and Brunching Shuttlecocks were like, this stuff is all just kind of cute. Like this is stuff that you could show your mom, and she might not think it was funny, but she at least wouldn't be like upset by it.
Yeah.
So that was a big influence. I think for the other guys, Terry Pratchett was a big thing too. I never really got into Pratchett, but my understanding is that he was just sort of like fantasy Douglas Adams.
He's pretty off the wall. Yeah.
The Funny Walks is really a testament to how effective Wes Cleveland, our animator for West of Loathing, was. We didn't know when we set out to make West of Loathing what okay, I kind of want to make a video game that's like a real video game where you're a character walking around a room and stuff. It's like, we had no idea if it was going to work. We had no idea if the art style of KOL was going to translate to that kind of space and animation at all. And we hired a guy for like a 1-day contract to just make a little prototype of it. And I just sat and drew some stuff and scanned it and handed him the images. And he built out this little scene in Unity where you're just walking around. It's like, yeah, okay, this is definitely going to work. So we did a few months of pre-production and then put the team together, and we brought Wes on, who we'd worked with on a few games before. And he turned out to just have this sort of amazing comic animation sensibility. Like, I think it would be interesting to get a list of his specific influences. Like, I think I specifically pointed him to the like Ministry of Silly Walks, Monty Python stuff when I said, hey, and it was like, it was just such a throwaway gag too, and it's a thing that the press has really latched onto, and that streamers have gotten really excited about, and it's a thing that ends up being this. It has this sort of outsized effect on the public impression of the game. But I said, it would be funny if there was a book that was like Walking Tall, but it was Walking Stupid, and it changed the way you walk. Like, hey Wes, can you do a couple of goofy walk cycles that replace the normal walk cycle? And he came back a few days later. Was like, well, here's 20.
That's the thing, there's so many. Just when you think you've seen them all, and he starts dolphining across the room or something. And
then every time he didn't have anything more pressing to work on, that was just
that's so awesome.
Right. He added the feature where when you went into a dark area, your character walks around with the lantern out, and he's like, oh, I guess I should make a bunch for when you have the lantern. So it's just like, man, he is so good at what he does. We were really lucky to find him, and that stuff. I think he was really instrumental in making it so the game was funny in other ways than just the writing, and the art. I guess it's hard for me to, because I'm the one who does it. It's hard for me to have any feelings about it at all. I guess that's what an artist says, right? When I make art, I don't have any feelings about it. But it's like goofy, right? But it isn't like funny. And I think the animation is really what sells it as a game that isn't just a game about reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, it certainly gives.
Work. Yeah.
Yeah, it gives the game a couple of layers of humor rather than it just being one thing, which is probably a good thing as opposed to a bad thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's when you fire up West of Loathing for the first time and you see those visuals, for me it immediately spoke to me as to, all right, I can know immediately what kind of game this is going to be. I know what to expect before I even get into the dialogue and the reading and the conversation. The art style already says to you, don't take this too seriously. We're going to have some fun. You know what I mean? And it was great. It was great.
Is that why you've chosen that art style, or is this like what's the deal there? Because when I made Kingdom of Loathing, it was just me. The art style was what I could do. And it I had made this card game prototype, like maybe a year before Kingdom of Loathing came out, and
I did little just little stick figure line drawing illustrations on it, and I took them to my artist friend and I said, hey, if I decided I wanted to make this game, would you be interested in doing the art for it? And he looked at it and he said, you should just use this. Like, this looks cool. This is an actual style. And I okay, whatever. Like, if you don't want to do it, just tell me you don't want to do it. Like, but it really did seem to resonate with people. And even though it is crude, it is not careless. And, I think I can't help but have gotten a little bit better at it in just doing it every day for 15 years. And so I think you definitely look at it and you think, okay, this is a choice as opposed to this is a limitation now. And so, it's just, I think it's kind of in trying to figure out, all right, now that there's more than one Loathing game, like, what does it mean for a game to be a Loathing game? And I think it probably means that I have to draw it and that we have to write it in the style that it's written in. Otherwise, other than that, it could probably be anything. I mean, probably pretty tricky to do like a first-person game in this art style, but I imagine we'll try at some point, see what that looks like.
Does that mean we can expect, like, VR of Loathing or something? We'll have like 3D
I haven't
interactive. Whoa!
Somebody had figured out a way to run West of Loathing in a Vive where you're just hovering over the diorama of the scene, and I really want to give it a shot. You notice weird things because like almost everything in the scene is just tilted backwards at like 25 degrees or something to face the camera, because that's what makes it look right. Mm-hmm. Like that's what gives it that like 2D objects in a 3D space without it being like, because otherwise the way the camera is, the characters' heads would be closer to you than their feet, and it just looks really goofy. So I don't know. There would definitely be some challenges associated with getting that art into a real 3D space where you could look at it from the sides, because everything literally is just two-dimensional sprites.
Yes.
We go to a lot of trouble to make the line weights reasonably consistent across things, like the way the camera works and the sort of distance from the front of the screen to the back of the screen was chosen so that stuff didn't look too small or too different than foreground objects. There's that, like I said, for all of the childishness of the art style, I'm very particular about the way that it looks when it's actually presented on the screen, and so
So one of the important questions I had to ask, I was told to ask on pain of death: West of Loathing, Kingdom of Loathing, are they in the same universe, the same world, separated by time, or are they just sharing a name?
We always sort of had this. There was an area in in Kingdom of Loathing that was like a travel agency where you could go and pay to go to different places, and one of them was Distant Lands, which we just always thought of as being the Wild West of America. Like everything we had happened to you in Distant Lands, and everything that came from Distant Lands was just sort of cowboy themed, and so. Let's just say it's that. I mean, nobody actually refers to San Francisco as Frisco who lives here. So calling it Frisco in West of Loathing was a little bit of a nod towards, well, this may or may not be. I mean, I think we have a Texas Ranger. Maybe there's some place called Texas there.
Because I mean, that obviously then leads to, you could have in low orbit of Loathing and all the rest. I mean, there's the potential to just sort of keep going, I guess.
I'm sure we'd like to see.
Super clear about that. I mean, one thing about it being so goofy is that you don't really have to have a kind of a Bible to keep things consistent, right? Like things only need to be as consistent as is required in order for it to be funny. So, we actually kind of debated, like, when a person in West of Loathing is talking about the moon, do they acknowledge that Kingdom of Loathing had multiple moons? And that we ended up deciding that they would, and it kind of just went without comment. It's only in a couple of places. You never see it. The engine at this point doesn't support you being outside at night. So that's one reason that you never saw the moons. But yeah, so it's definitely in the same universe. We're not entirely sure if it's on the same planet or if there are just like multiple planets and one of them is very similar to America.
Maybe it's like the Marvel universes. There's the different slices of reality, right?
Yeah. Prime.
So, one question was that Kingdom of Loathing had things like boozing and stuff in it, whereas Western Loathing sort of this is just one of the questions that had come in was perhaps not downgraded, but perhaps restrained a little bit more. Was that intentional in terms of trying to get a better age rating and whatever have you, or just it didn't fit the story?
Because we'll have to figure this out if we want to release on consoles, I guess. But this was something when I showed West of Loathing at PAX Australia, we had to provide proof of an ESRB rating, and PC games don't have to do that. Like the digital only games, we just have not really bothered.
Yeah.
Internally, we've always kind of tried to maintain a kind of Looney Tunes level of discourse in the stuff. There's not really an occasional ass or hell in there, but we're not gonna go any more profane than that. We don't necessarily think of drinking as a thing that in opposition to I guess what the rest of the world thinks of America's typical attitude about this. We don't think of alcohol as a thing that necessarily has to be like hidden from children.
Yeah.
But sort of Looney Tunes minus the casual racism is kind of the discourse level.
That's probably a good move. Move.
Really, the reason that booze ended up being less of a focus in West of Loathing than it was in Kingdom of Loathing is because Kingdom of Loathing is a multiplayer game with an energy system, and the way that you get energy is by drinking booze and eating food. And so food and booze and the crafting of food and booze were really important elements to that game mechanically.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean anything necessarily in this game. If we can either make it so booze gives you interesting buffs and we limit the amount of it that you can have, or well, no, that was it. That was our option, right? If it was important, because there's not in Kingdom of Loathing, because it's an online game with a persistent character, you can only drink so much booze in a day, and so there is a kind of a limit on the amount of gameplay benefit that you can derive from it. But in this, we wanted to maintain the same kind of generosity of item drops and stuff, and we just wanted you to find a lot of stuff. But because we didn't want you to be able to just kind of infinitely buff your character, because that would make it even more difficult to balance combat, it just ended up being a little bit less of a focus.
Yeah.
Which I know, a lot of people think of Kingdom of Loathing as, oh yeah, that game where you make cocktails and pasta. And so I imagine we'll revisit that in a more fundamental way. And like when I'm thinking about the next game, I definitely am thinking, I really need to put cocktail crafting in the next game.
Oh dear. I mean,
a lot of people learned how to make cocktails by playing Kingdom of Loathing, and that's fantastic.
Awesome. That is awesome.
Okay, yeah. It is important to offer education to your players. Yeah.
Yeah. This is whiskey plus a cherry.
Nice. Very very sophisticated.
In real life, whiskey plus a cherry plus vermouth. So it was pretty close.
So you mentioned obviously that you had worked on this card game, and that's sort of where the artistic style maybe originated from. Was there any sort of role-playing game experience for you that fed into Kingdom of Loathing? Like, were you playing any tabletop role-playing or?
Yeah, weirdly, and this hardly ever comes up, and so I think that you asking me that question makes me realize, with Josh in high school, we played a bunch of Toon, which was I think published by Steve Jackson Games, and it was Greg Kostikian and I think Warren Spector weirdly made this cartoon themed paper role-playing game, which was just very silly, and it was about, like, the rules were centered around making a fun and funny experience for the player, as opposed to being really crunchy numbers wise or whatever. And that was that. I mean, I think I probably, like a lot of people who grew up in small towns, I spent a lot more time reading RPG source books than I did playing RPG.
I have that's exclusive to small towns.
I only played D&D maybe 10 times in my life. I played a bunch of the West End Star Wars,
Yes. Yep.
the D6 role-playing game too, which was also made by Greg Costigan. It ended up like looking back at the books of the stuff that I really liked when I was a kid, like, oh, apparently I'm just a big fan of Greg Costigan.
There you go.
So any plans to move, say, West of Loathing or Kingdom of Loathing into a physical space then with, say, board games, card games, role-playing games, that kind of thing? Or
it's one of those things that I think we would all be interested in doing it, but I think it's a thing that takes up so much time that it's hard for us to ever think like, okay, rather than working on this thing which is our career that's like, keeping the lights on and keeping all of us employed, let's do this other thing that we would, our 12-year-old selves would have been very excited at the idea of us doing in the future. There was a licensed KOL board game that was kickstarted a few years ago, which was
okay.
But we didn't have anything to do with the design of it. It's the idea of making a tabletop, like Josh and I both made a bunch of just very simple tabletop game systems in high school. And we sort of had this lunch table of people for 1 year that every day one of us would show up with like, here's this new game that I made. Let's play this. And it was, we were kids basically. So it was mostly about like, well, how many different kinds of dice can I incorporate into these storytelling or whatever.
Yeah. Well, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's turned out that computer games are the best way to translate our effort into joy for the players.
So how much does West of Loathing kind of in game mechanics wise differ from Kingdom of Loathing? And like, is it a conscious decision to make them as similar or as different as they are?
So a lot of the basic 3 stats have the same names and they kind of mean the same thing. We really relished the opportunity with West of Loathing to be able to start from scratch and build systems without being constrained by every dumb mistake that we had made for 15 years.
Yeah.
It becomes very difficult to change things in an entrenched MMO, without upsetting people or and it's even not even about upsetting people, but like, if I change this thing, it's going to have just very unpredictable knock-on effects in the way that it affects other systems. So,
repercussions.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun to be able to build systems, and we would constantly find ourselves feeling this like instinct to like, well, no, because if somebody went in there, they could get like 5 of these things instead of 2 of these things if we do it that way. Wait a minute, this is a single-player game. Who cares? If they want to, like, let's be generous with this stuff. And it was really nice to be able to do that without having to like worry about supporting a player economy with every balance decision and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So is that kind of why you approached a single player game this time rather than a multiplayer game?
Yeah. I mean, also we just wanted to see if we could do it. I think, it's kind of, we made a multiplayer game with a free-to-play business model back when nobody was doing that, and now that everyone is trying to do that, we decided, no, you know what? A single-player package experience is the way to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, Steam reviews have you guys, I think it's extremely positive, very, super positive. Like, I had a look, you've got like 1,500-something positive reviews, and then there's like 20 negative, and even the negative reviews are like, I really like this game, and they all start like that, and it's like, but it's just this one little thing that's like...
Yeah, there's a bunch of... like half of them are negative reviews because we didn't ship with keyboard remapping.
Yeah, or whatever, something ridiculous.
You really care about that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it must be very gratifying then to sort of go from...
really gratifying to see the fan response to this. Just and so many new people, too. We always knew when we were making West of Loathing, like, all right, well, we're going to sell this to the people that already know us and like us, and we just kind of hoped that there would be some chance that it would hit outside of that, and that it would have some kind of broader appeal. And I think we did not anticipate at all that it would be popular with streamers. Because that's another thing, like just conventional wisdom is like when you're releasing a game now, if it's not good for streaming, it's not going to go viral because that's the only way that games go viral now. And we thought, well, okay.
Yeah.
Oh. but then it turns out streamers, what their audience is like is them being funny. And if they can just read stuff and it's funny and they can just do voices while they're reading it out loud, then that's less work for them than if they have to like make up funny stuff about a serious game that they're playing. And so we just didn't imagine. I mean, we're all old, so we don't
not that old.
Never watch a YouTube video game streamer, right? We just don't know what it even is there.
Yep.
We just assumed, well, there's no way that they're just going to want to read, right? And there's just so much reading in this game that we just did. We dramatically underestimated the extent to which it would appeal to streamers, and I guess therefore the kids that watch streamers.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, I mean, obviously there's plans to maybe move West of Loathing onto consoles. What about things like DLC, extra stories, sort of expanding the base game?
Yeah. We're working now on a piece of DLC. It isn't that the DLC is taking longer than we expected. It's that we, after the sort of crunch of finishing West of Loathing, we're way more tired than we were expecting. And also, it's just we've been working on the iOS port that we had promised, and that ended up being a lot more work than we thought.
Yeah.
And just the stuff, like, I mean, cry me a river, but like traveling around to like different things where we're nominated for awards and stuff. Like there's just all of this work associated with having released a game that we didn't anticipate. And so everything has just been, the combination of that and everyone just being exhausted has really kind of slowed things down. But I can't even say within a month or two when I think the first piece of DLC will be done, but we're definitely like, that is what I'm doing with my days now, is working on this DLC. And the iOS port is getting pretty close, but again, I don't want to make any promises about when that.
Don't, because then people will go, "You said this day."
I know. It's like we plan to put it on Switch, but you say that out loud, and suddenly it's like announced for Switch.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
believe me. Like I said, we're all like 40-something dudes, and so we're all very excited about the idea of a game that we made being on the new Nintendo. So
it's definitely getting a lot of attention. So when you're not working on a Loathing game, what are you playing? Like what are some of the highlights in your game collection?
I play a lot of Hearthstone.
Okay. I'm sorry to hear that. No, just kidding.
I know. That's the thing. It's boring, and it's boring to talk about because it's just been talked to death, and it just is a lot of time. But I'm trying to think what I've been excited about recently. I keep trying to find something on the Switch that is recapturing the excitement of playing SteamWorld Dig 2 on the Switch.
Right.
That was pretty good. Last year I really liked Prey.
Yep.
That was, and sort of all of us, everyone who works on this project, we all really enjoy the sort of Deus Ex or Dishonored kind of like immersive sim stuff, and I don't know what I don't really know what to make of that because our games are nothing like that.
That don't have to be though. I mean, but you've got to have mad respects for Mr. Warren Spector, of course. Have you met the man? Have you been blessed enough to we're not worthy, of course, but
he stopped by I think this was like his wife or his partner at the time saw our Comic-Con booth maybe 10, 12 years ago and said, "Oh, my husband Warren would really just quietly." By and I was like, "Oh, okay, hi." I think I told him that Deus Ex was the longest game that I had ever finished, and he said, "Me too." And then shook hands and he walked away.
Yeah. To date, too, for me, I think the original Deus Ex is one of the few games, if not the only game, that I finished it, I watched the end scene in the credits, and then I went straight to the main menu and clicked New Game. Like, there's very few times I've done that, and that was one of them. And it's the same thing, like Testimony to West of Loathing. It's that engaging storyline that sort of brings you back and wants you to keep playing the game. And you say, like, originally you're worried about volumes of text, but history has shown us games like Planescape Torment, for instance, an RPG that can be won purely through dialogue. There is room for it, and these games definitely have huge followings, cult followings in some instances. I mean, it's great that West of Loathing seems to be on that path, and I hope for you that sort of in 10 years' time, everyone's like, remember West of Loathing? That game was brilliant,
There have been a handful of critics that have mentioned West of Loathing in the same breath as Planescape Torment, and man, that is intimidating, and that's something else that I really liked last year was the new Torment game. I know it was a little less like universally beloved than Planescape Torment is.
Yeah.
But I had a great time with it. I thought it was really fun.
It's always hard to follow up on an original. Always.
It is, yeah. And I mean, especially with the risk of switching, which Torment Tides of Numenera did, to like a completely new system and sort of world and stuff. And it's like that game definitely had problems. Like I understand why people didn't like it quite as much because it's like the combat was kind of a little bit of a mess. But the combat in Planescape Torment was no great shakes either, right? It was very it was like Baldur's Gate, except your stats are terrible, right? So
it was pretty generic. Yeah. So I mean, thinking more long term, I mean, we would Kingdom of Loathing 2 or Kingdom of Loathing the visual update or Space of Loathing. I mean, where's the future? I mean, don't give away all the trade secrets, but what's sort of floating around
in
there?
The future?
Yeah,
I think it would be very difficult to convince us that it was a good idea to make another online multiplayer game. Just because part of what we wanted to do with West of Loathing was like, wouldn't it be great if we made a game and then at some point we were done? Because that's just we're still constantly updating. It's still even though no one's ever heard of it, realistically, like in the broader market, like it still was paying the bills. It was still keeping the studio. Like it's still, there's a lot of people playing it, and it's still pretty vibrant. Our plan with West of Loathing, like we really saw like it has been tremendously successful in terms of sales and reception, certainly, but we didn't need it to be really. We thought, well, okay, we see this first game as an investment in the engine. And so basically the first year of development was just making the engine for the game with all of the features that we thought we would ever want for this game and future games. And then the last year was like, all right, really knuckling down and getting the content for West of Loathing done. And so our plan all along was to have an engine that we could use to just make games like this for 10 years.
Right.
And I think that's kind of what we want to do. And whether making games in this engine for 10 years means making 2 games with a year or 2 of DLC on each of them, or if it means making 4 or 5 games, I don't know. We'll have to see. Like, when we put out DLC for this, depending on how it does, how well it's received, how excited we are about making another one, then we'll figure out what our plans are. And we're very fortunate to be sitting on a decent cushion here to be able to kind of do what we think is going to result in us making the best products for people, rather than being forced to scramble for money.
So if you do a sequel or something after West of Loathing, you think you'll keep the West setting, or are you going to explore explore something else?
It won't be another cowboy game. That maybe the 5th game will be a return to the West of so there's a lot of things that we've tossed around. I mean, there are no real specific firm plans for an ordering here, but we'd really like to do a space game. We would really like to do a game in the West of Loathing engine that's just set in the Kingdom of Loathing universe with that kind of stuff, with just like sort of basic fantasy stuff. We think that would be a lot of fun, and we also already just have 15 years worth of stuff that we could adapt to that for a new context and a new audience.
I mean,
and again, I think none of these things are going to be the next game necessarily, but
well, what you do, so I mean, you just follow the Blizzard sort of tree here. I mean, you've got your role-playing game. Now you need the card game, and you need the real-time strategy game, and this is how it works, right? So you need you need Hearth of Loathing, right? So it's
right
with in-app purchases and loot crates.
Like a Lord's Management, Heroes of the Storm kind of game.
Yeah, see, it worked for them. Clearly it's going to work for Asymmetric as well. Clearly. One question I did skip over before. Is there a particular gag or joke in West of Loathing that you're particularly proud of, or you had an extra good laugh at, something that stands out?
For me specifically?
Yes, for you specifically.
It's
a hard one.
I think it is. So this one, because I sort of pitched to Riff, I said, all right, in this tent, if you speak Goblin and you go into the back of this tent, what I want is for you to see a goblin doing Hamlet's soliloquy. And it did not occur to me that by giving that specific set of direction to Riff, that he was going to produce probably the funniest piece of writing in West of Loathing, which is that goblin version of Hamlet's soliloquy. It's just that I am in constant awe of how quickly and consistently he can come up with stuff that is funny in the exact way that works on me. But yeah, I mean, there's a bunch. I mean, conceptually, like, I think the bandits with the fake town is pretty funny. I mean, but it's hard. It's also kind of hard to gauge all of this. Like, what's your favorite joke that you made last year? You know, so we could point to stuff that the other people did, but I don't know. I like there's in the hat factory where the bandits are holed up. There's a piano. There's like a player piano that you can turn on that's set to play like demo versions of children's piano songs, and I had a good time recording. Those are all me playing the piano in the studio at work. And I had a good time doing a like ragtime piano arrangement of Cotton Eye Joe by Rednecks. That is, I think, most consistently makes me smile when I think, I did that to people.
I was the guy, and I'm sure there's lots of us out there, but I was one of those guys that had to go through every single spittoon. And yeah. Are you sure? Yes. Are you really sure? Yes. This stinks. Are you sure? Yes. And what was amazing is every time I was rewarded. Like every time I stuck to my guns, you got something for it.
Yep. When I gave Riff the first one of those to write, I said, all right, there's going to be 7 or 8 of these in the game, and they should get progressively grosser. And he wrote the first one, and I don't understand how you're going to get grosser than this even one. But it really went places. Like
it did.
That's again, you know, it's so weird looking back at the project and seeing which things stick with people. You know, like the things that are definitely the just sort of like that articles mention and latch onto. The silly walking is definitely one of them. The Spittoons are one of them, and Gary the Goblin is one of them. And it's, you know, those were all just like parts of a huge thing that we were making, and it's so interesting to see like which things kind of resonate with people larger.
But it's very much true, like, say, Monty Python's Flying Circus. You know, people will go, hey, do you remember this particular skit? Do you remember this particular scene? And they have their favourites. And testimony to the game, I think that's very much the same with West of Loathing. You're going to have people going, I particularly love this gag, I love this scene, and love this character. You know, that's an awesome thing. Like, it's good that, you know, that's happening. And you can see it happening in the forums and when you talk to people about the game.
Yeah, I love seeing on Twitter whenever somebody says, oh, this game is really funny, and they show a screenshot of something that no one else has ever shown a screenshot of before. I'm like, good,
yeah.
Okay. Like, every piece of this. You know, I remember seeing an interview with the Mystery Science Theater 3000 guys. That's an influence that I also obviously like didn't remember to mention, but they basically had this philosophy that like no joke. If you are making a thing that consists of nothing but jokes, it isn't really possible for a joke to be too obscure or too narrow in its appeal, because even if you make a joke that only one person out of 1,000 gets, like, how stoked is that person that made a joke for them? Yeah. You know, and for everybody else, it's like, you know, like you watch The Simpsons, and at least if you're like me when I was a kid watching The Simpsons, like, there's going to be a percentage of those jokes that go over your head just because they're about something that you don't know about. Yeah. But like, they were there for somebody, and so that's always kind of been our approach. And I think you can get away with it if you generally have more hits than misses, or at least like more things that people recognize as jokes than things that are just mystifying to people.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think too, a lot of the humor in West of Loathing, from what I've seen anyway, isn't tied into current world events. Like I didn't see a lot of like a joke about the current American president, for instance. Like, there was, so that you could come into this game 5 years later and still get the jokes, you know what I mean? Whereas I've played other games that they try and make these pop culture references, then they just get lost in time.
Yeah, and that's a thing that we definitely do on purpose. Like, we had the benefit of doing this with a very critical audience for a really long time, and learning kind of what things worked and what things didn't with Kingdom of Loathing. But even in the beginning, we were like, we don't need to make fun of people because of their choice of religion. Like there's no sense in making a joke. There's no sense in making the easy joke that could alienate people, when you could just make a better joke instead that like anyone could at least like not be upset about, Yeah. And like meme stuff, there is nothing that just makes me groan harder than playing a game and just seeing like a quote from GLaDOS coming out of a computer. It's like, okay,
it dates it too. It dates your game.
That was funny when they did it.
Yes, exactly.
Just saying it. Like, you're the guy at the bar who just says a line from Seinfeld, and like, because that got a laugh once.
Yeah. That's
what you do now, and it's just just avoiding that. Just avoiding, like, there's not going to be, a joke about eating Tide Pods. Who knows if that's going to make any sense to anyone in a year, much less 5 years, and so it's, yeah. I mean, I think that was another thing that Kingdom of Loathing kind of helped us practice, was we were like, after the first 5 years of Kingdom of Loathing, we were like, well, shit, jokes we wrote 5 years ago are still here. We should probably think about the jokes that we're writing now in terms of, like, these are things that people are still going to be seeing in 5 years, and how do we want that to reflect on it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you spent a year in the engine with West of Loathing. How long did it take you to sort of finish the game? Well, how long was the project's creation time in total, I guess? I mean...
So there was maybe 6 months of pre-production where we were kind of deciding what the game was going to be, and more or less accurately how large it was going to be and how much it was going to consist of. We'd sort of done, like, I'd figured out, like, here's what the world maps looks like. Here's, there's a mine here, a mine here, a mine here, a ranch here, some bandits here. Once we spun up the whole team full time, it was basically exactly 2 years.
So that's the thing. It's easy to make the mistake that you can look at the game purely from an aesthetic point of view and go, oh, this was a one of those 48-hour challenges. And they don't. Some people who haven't played the game obviously won't appreciate the amount of work and effort that goes into making something like this.
Yeah.
Don't judge the book by its cover, people.
And so I think there's a couple of points here. One is that is one of the biggest things that we have in our favor, I think, is that you don't expect there to be anywhere near as much game there as there is from looking at it. And so and especially, like, for most of the time that we were working on this, we thought we have to sell this for $20. Like, this is a $20 game. And I think it is a $20 game, but we were just forced to acknowledge that this does not look like a $20 game, and no one else, like, nobody cares how much work something was. Like, they care what the product is, right? Yeah. When it's in front of them, and like, no one is going to look at this and think, oh yeah, that's worth $20. I'll as an impulse buy pick this up for $20. So we were counseled by multiple people that, like, guys, you need to sell this for like $10, because you, like, if you're going to hit the Steam charts to begin with, you need to have this at impulse buy price point, because it does not look like as much as it is.
Yeah.
The second point is kind of, well, I don't remember what the second point was, but let's make up a new one.
Yep, legit, like it.
Because we spent so much time on it, and also we got very lucky with Victor Thompson, the programmer, who the person who programmed the West of Loathing engine was the lead gameplay programmer for Infamous 2. So he was a much better programmer than this project needed.
Right.
And a much better job of making every aspect of this game than needed to be done. So it, like, the extent to which this thing is just robust, and we had really little support needed afterwards. Like, when the game launched, all of the other indies that we talked to was like, well, all right, you're launching an indie game on Steam, you're going to spend the next 6 months fixing bugs. It's like, well, no, not really. Like, we shipped without a lot of bugs because the programmer was just really, really on the ball.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that at least in retrospect, I can say, yeah, it was a good idea for us to spend that time building the engine up and thinking of this as an investment in an engine that we could reuse for multiple games.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So you were saying...
I was going to say that I'm dry of questions, so you should definitely throw yours out there.
Well, you were saying before, like, West of Loathing's about $10 on Steam. It's actually like $10.99 or something, isn't it? What's with the recurring? Because I noticed that you reached, was it $111,111 or something? Gave it 11% off. What's with this whole 11 thing going on? Like,
there's a band that was based out of they're still around, I think, although some of them have died at this point because they're all sort of old hippies. A band called Negative Land that was based out of the San Francisco Bay Area here.
Yep.
They did. It's not precisely music what they do. They're
it was noise though, then I assume.
Very, very political, but they had an album called Escape from Noise that I think came out in the late '80s, or maybe very, very early '90s, and it had a song on it called Time Zones, which was just a bunch of samples from some crackpot that called into some radio talking about how big the Soviet Union was and how they had 11 time zones, and the song was just a person saying 11, 11, 11 over and over again, saying 11, ridiculous, not even funny. And so there was just this early gag that I put into Kingdom of Loathing that was whenever you got 11 of an item or 11 of a stat or whatever, it would append, it's ridiculous, it's not even funny to it. So 11 just became kind of a meme in Kickstarter. And also, realized, well, okay, we want this game to be under $10 while it's on the Steam charts. If we make it $11 and do a 10% launch discount, then it'll be under $10. So it'll make that threshold, but it'll still be slightly more valuable in the back catalog than it would have been.
Yep.
11 and 23 and 37 are the kind of the numbers that we always go back to in King.
Awesome. You got any other questions, Matt? Something that you've pre-prepared?
No. I have a pitch for you though.
Oh, here we go. This is terrible.
About whether, yeah, I know. This is the first time I've tried this as well. So here we go. Because you were talking about, the sequels and stuff being up in the air. So I kind of think if you're going to look at different areas and stuff, maybe Australia could be one. Yeah. But you could set it like kind of like in the 80s here in Australia. It was kind of like a transitional period. So.
I've got the title. Instead of West of Loathing, it's Far West of Bloody Anywhere.
See, no, I personally was thinking you could call it Girt by Loathing. So, which is like of our national anthem, the word Girt is the word that confuses everybody the most. So
what does it mean?
The line is Girt by sea, which means that Australia is surrounded by sea.
Like girded, like girt.
Yeah, sort of like that. Yeah, so yeah, I think so. So keep that in your back pocket. Don't tell anybody I told you, and then you can pull it out at one of the meetings. And you'll be like, "What about Girt by Girt by
Loathing?
Girt by Loathing, yeah." Nice. There you go.
My primary impression of Australian culture was defined by the Road Warrior. So if we do the post-apocalyptic.
Oh yeah, that'd work too. Yeah,
definitely. Some nods to it being in Australia. I was there a few months ago for the first time, and I was surprised by how few mohawked.
We're not all walking around sniffing feelers
while we were driving around.
All right,
they're definitely there though.
I think that's about all the questions we've got for you at the moment, Zach. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on to the show and having a chat with us. It's really appreciated. Congratulations on West of Loathing. It seems to be an enormous success. I know I've also enjoyed the game greatly. And wherever you go next, may it be 11, 11, 11, 11, 11, 11, 11.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.